Hello, everyone. World Affairs Council members share truly a love for travel, and many of you joining us today have embarked on journeys with us to learn about different cultures and countries. In fact, some of you have already traveled with me, and I bet you recognize this backdrop behind me. It's from Sidi Bou Said, and about 20 miles away from the capital of Tunisia, Tunis. And it's the view I had out of my window when I lived in Tunis. So you can see how happy I am when I go back there. Another way to travel with World Affairs Council is to go to the site for the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia. That's wacphila.org, because they have just so many trips. And again, truly scores of our members from Dallas, Fort Worth, and across the country have gone with Philadelphia, as well as some of the trips that we organize at the World Affairs Council of Dallas, Fort Worth. And I'm Jim Falk, president of the World Affairs Council of Dallas, Fort Worth. Well, of course, global travel has come to a fast halt last year, but you can keep on learning. And one way to learn is with this wonderful partnership we established with the Stranger's Guide. And it's such a wonderful way to inspire and keep alive the wanderlust that we all have. And I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about the magazine right now because I'm so pleased that we have the co-founder and publisher, Abby Rapoport, with us. But before I bring her into the conversation, let me just remind you that to keep up with programs at our World Affairs Council, just go to dfwworld.org. And I really do ask and hope that you'll share our programs with your friends, social media. And to keep up, you can also go to our YouTube channel. And of course, that is DFW World. I want to thank our sponsor for this program, as well as all of our programs under the Global Forum, and that is Billingsley Company. And Lucy, I hope you're watching because no one travels and has more adventures than Lucy Billingsley. So Abby, welcome. I'm not going to read this introduction that our staff kindly prepared for me because I want you to tell us about your life. All of us, I suspect many of us have thought about, I'd like to have a bed and breakfast. I'd like to own a restaurant. And, it'd really be fun to be an editor of a magazine. So, but we know there's some real challenges to that. So how did you get into this?
Oh my goodness. Well, I always loved journalism, and I was a hugely nerdy child. So I was really into, when I was in, I think, the third grade, I told my friends we should really start a school newspaper, and we created like a little, Xerox sheet that, so I had the bug early. I loved storytelling, and I think I always particularly really like the idea of telling stories no one else was telling, right? So there's sort of two kinds of journalists. I think they're the journalists who want to get the story first that everyone's chasing, and they're the folks who want to, go out to the places where no one is. And I was definitely always more drawn to the latter. I was a political reporter in Texas for a number of years. And one of my kind of favorite experiences as a young reporter was getting to go to, far east and far west Texas and, travel with these state reps, whose districts could be 6 hours in each direction to that may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but certainly 3 hours in each direction to explore, their experiences and the experiences of their constituents and how they saw the world. So, sort of fast forwarding, I was also, I think, because of when I entered the profession, I was always fascinated by models to kind of make journalism sustainable and think creatively about, the models that we use for storytelling. And so, fast forwarded, I kind of transitioned more and more from being in the journalism end of it and the writing end of it to more of the business end and the publishing piece.
Did you major in journalism, and where'd you go to college?
I went to Grinnell College in the middle of Iowa, which does not have a journalism program, but has, like good liberal arts colleges, has a sort of thriving journalism community and publishing community nonetheless. And I got into political reporting there because I got to report on the 2008 presidential race. And what's crazy about being a student in Iowa that no one tells you is that it's sort of the best seat in the House for presidential primaries. And so we got to interview Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton. They all came through, and so because it was a small school that we mostly saw Democratic candidates, but it was
That's
really
very true. I
fun.
mean, the best way now to get a political view is go to college in New Hampshire or Iowa.
It's it's more true than I would have thought, I will
Because you're
say.
going to make contacts that you wouldn't get in any other way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was an interesting time because I graduated from college in 2008, and it was this time when things were changing so rapidly. And so, I would sort of wide-eyed go up to famous reporters from the New York Times and say, oh, I just want to be like you. I just want to be a reporter like you. And they would sort of say, oh, the industry, it's terrible. It's going in a bad direction. But, kind of youth is, sees no challenge, and in the the pessimism of their elders. So I was sort of ready to go in with both feet, even.
So is this the first magazine that you founded?
Absolutely, first magazine that I founded. I had
And did you
been.
see this niche, this opening? And so how do you
Yeah,
decide to go with this?
so we were interested in two things. So my partner and co-founder Kira, I came from more of a political reporting background and news rap background. She came from more of a literary background. She had experience. She'd been a war correspondent in Yugoslavia, in the former Yugoslavia during the conflict, but she had sort of moved more and more into the literary world. And she had been the founding executive editor of Lapham's Quarterly, which is a magazine that's more about history. And she and I had always been close friends, and we'd always had this conversation that why is it when you want to talk about a location that you almost have to go to very different sources to get a full picture? That if you want to learn about the politics, the economics, you're reading one set of magazines and books. If you want to read about the literature and the arts, you're at a totally different set of publications and books, let alone if you're sort of reading about, cocktails and sports, right? And yet you get these very different pictures of a place, and yet we all know it's one place, right? And so Cuba is a great example of this. It is its political history, its complicated records on human rights and speech. It's also its thriving literary scene, cultural arts scene. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces, and it's very hard to get that window, let alone a window that's told by people from that location. And so we had always sort of talked about that and always said, wouldn't it be neat if? And then sort of things came together, and we both found ourselves sort of with the bandwidth, and we thought, okay, this is kind of the moment. We can't let this go. And so we launched a Kickstarter in the summer of 2018, and by the fall of 2018 had published our first guide, which was to Mexico City.
And you've just celebrated, like you said, your 2-year anniversary. When you said Kickstarter, does that mean that you did that funding through some type of internet?
We did an initial funding through Kickstarter. That's right.
And how much money did you raise? What was your goal, and how much money did you raise?
By the skin of our teeth, we got $75,000, which was a very large project for sort of the publishing part of Kickstarter, and that sort of gave us the boost to get going.
And so, what did those investors get in return?
Well, the main thing you got was a subscription to the publication, and so at different levels, we included other items. We worked with a travel agent, so people could get some travel advice. We got bags and T-shirts like any good Kickstarter, and we also kept people informed through. We had launched a newsletter early before we started called Field Guide, which we still do every Tuesday, and that explores sort of the inverse of the magazine. So the magazine is one place from a lot of perspectives, and our newsletter was a theme across lots of places. So looking at spices or whiskey or voting, and like what does that look like in different parts of the world.
Well, I have the stack of some of the magazines right here. This one is Across the Mediterranean, and I wonder if we could just talk about it and tell our viewers, and let me remind all of you who are watching, go ahead and type in your questions and we'll work them into our conversation. But it's so beautifully done. There are a few things that I note and I'd like you to comment on it. One, the photos. I mean, it's really photo essays as well. There's essentially no advertising. So tell us about how you lay out the magazine.
Absolutely. So our photography, we really feel like, I mean, I'll back up slightly and say that we felt like there was a huge opportunity because in general, writers, non-US based writers and especially non-Western based writers have a tough time kind of breaking through and reaching American audiences. It's really difficult, particularly as sort of the overall journalism ecosystem has dwindled and sort of shrunk over the last few years. And so we really thought there was a huge opportunity to reach out to top name, top-notch writers and photographers and say, hey, we're doing something and we'd love for you to, tell us what's the story you wish people knew about where you're from or where you live. And I'd say that was all the more true for photography. There are fewer and fewer magazines that can really, that are print at the quality level that you need to give you really excellent photo essays and photo experiences. And that's something that we really pride ourselves on, that the guides are something you save and you can flip through. And so one thing really led to another with photographers, where now we have photographers coming to us saying, we would love the opportunity to take photographs for you. And so we, and I would just expand that also to say that there are stories that are told sometimes in ways through images and photography that hit you in a different way because you're seeing them through that medium and not through words, or multimedia, like through video, which we're so used to now with the internet. And so even just in the 2 years that we've been doing the magazine, I think my understanding of what a photo essay is and can be has just greatly expanded. Like I just have even further respect for the form. So that's the photo essay piece of it. So we always do at least 2 to 3 major photo essays in every guide. And that's something we.
Oh, this one is very interesting. Tell people about this, The Edge of the Night in
The
Texas.
Edge of the Night. Well, I didn't. I mean, this is one of the great things about this publication is I learned so much about every place that we cover. So Edge of Night is a story by Robin Ross from our Texas guide, which just came out. And as a native Texan, it was really fun to watch us put together a Texas guide and discover how much I didn't know about a state that I love dearly. And the Edge of Night piece is on light pollution, which is a form of pollution we don't really hear that much about. And as the story points out, is a form of pollution is one of the easiest to combat. That we can actually fix it and reverse the effects of it much faster than other forms of pollution. And it's a form of pollution that has real effects on animals, on plant life and other forms of the ecosystem. And so Robin Ross wrote that piece looking at Texas's night skies and these scientists and activists who are really working hard to help us preserve nighttime, which was not a topic I knew anything about. And now I really noticed, and I was just saying to my husband, we should really get out to the hill country and experience like real night.
So what about the timeline? I mean, I would think that there's a lot of planning, and especially when you're working with other countries and writers that you may not know, you've got a long lead time.
It varies a lot is the sort of the honest answer, right? So we are often working on multiple guides at the same time. So if I look to last year, we did our Lagos, Nigeria, Seoul, or South Korea, but with a heavy emphasis on Seoul, our Mediterranean guide and our Texas guide. And I would say that most of those guides were being commissioned simultaneously, particularly now that we can't, until last year, we would always travel to the place, right? And a lot of our work ahead of time, a lot of that legwork happened in person in the location. That's obviously not possible now. And so we've had to get more creative about making contacts and developing the kinds of conversations that ideally would be happening in person, but through Zoom and other ways. And through sort of hosting like almost mini conferences with experts. And that's one of the things we do with Mediterranean, to get those networks, right? So sort of bring together different people, gallery owners, writers, teachers, performers, right? All in one place. And they sort of start talking amongst themselves and we start saying, oh, can you connect us to that person? Can you make that introduction? But you're right, it does. It's almost sort of like pulling a thread and one thing leads to another.
And how many issues are there per year?
4.
4 quarterly. Okay. Tell us about the different levels of membership and the importance of the website, because I realized that I had not been spending enough time on your website.
Oh, wonderful. Well, yeah, our website is a lot of fun. So we have 3 levels. The first level, the fellow traveler, you get your welcome gift, which right now is a set of postcards with our covers on them. Our covers are all sort of original illustrations, so we think they're a kind of fun thing to celebrate. At our plus level, you get what I think is a really exciting thing, which is access digitally to all of our back issues. Our fellow traveler members get digital access to the guides, that they've subscribed for. But if you upgrade to that plus level, then you can access every guide that we have, which will be 10 as of the end of this month. And you also get a holiday gift as well. And at our premium level, we actually have started sourcing very cool kinds of gifts and items from all over the world, and we send you 6 of those per year. Additionally, at the plus and premium level, starting later on this month, we're going to be launching our digital events series, and our plus and premium members will get access sometimes by invite only events that are only for plus and premium members, or get free tickets to ticketed events for the general public.
So we touched on this a second ago, but there's no advertising. So
no,
let's talk about that model.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a sort of unusual model. One of the big things that we really prioritize above else is that our publications feel experiential, right? Like what we want, this is armchair travel, right, is our topic. We want this publication for you to sit down and really feel transported, right? That you sort of are getting these stories that are in conversation with one another, and that it's a really special experience. And so to do that, we really prioritize not putting anything in the guide that's going to disrupt. Now, what we do, and actually our Columbia guide will be the first to do this, is we do sponsored pieces. But those pieces we like to say are going to be at the same level of quality as the content you would find that's not sponsored. So our sponsored content would always be noted. You'll always, we're always going to be really upfront if something's been paid for. But the quality of it, this isn't, an ad for a car that you're going to, flip past. It's a story that's still, kind of living up to that transportive experience that we want to provide.
Another thing that I thought was very interesting is, although you certainly are encouraging people or giving them, a lot of opinions and views about the different countries and areas that you've have addressed, there's also some pretty hard-hitting stories, especially on Texas, about the death penalty.
Yeah. These aren't like, it's interesting. I mean,
Don't sugarcoat.
No, we definitely don't. These are, we really want to challenge, we're really mission driven, right? Like, and our mission is to, we say challenge stereotypes and provide a global perspective. And so what we're really offering, we don't ask people to agree with it. We don't pretend that like these are, the be all end all of every piece, but we want to expose our readers to opinions and positions from people around the world that you might not have encountered before. Because I think, and especially as we sort of enter this hyper polarized period, both in the United States and around the world, trying to bridge that a little by just offering these new perspectives. And so, yeah, we don't, it's transportive, but it's definitely not escapist. And I think Texas is that way. Mediterranean, right? Mediterranean and Caribbean are 2 of my favorite guides that we've done. And they're both about places that I think for a lot of us as Americans, we sort of associate with like beaches and resorts and a good cocktail, right? And it is those things. I mean, it absolutely, like the Mediterranean and the Caribbean are beautiful places to have a good time. But they're also places with a huge amount of conflict that are disproportionately impacted by a lot of, global challenges. And we want to talk about that too. I think it's important for people who want to engage in travel and want to, think of themselves as globetrotters, to go into places with an awareness of what the experience is for people who live there, and for the things that you're kind of by definition not going to see, right? We in our Mexico City, which was our first guide, one of my favorite pieces is about Tepito, which is a neighborhood with a fairly negative reputation and a pretty violent set of incidents that happen there on a pretty regular basis. And it's a story that tracks a family that lives in Tepito and has lived in Tepito for generations. And we think it's an important story because as a traveler, you're probably not gonna, you're not gonna encounter that experience. And even if you kind of go looking for it, it's never gonna be like seeing it through the eyes of people who for whom it's their day-to-day reality.
I have to laugh that our vice chairman, a man named David Jacobs, who travels all the time, He writes, Abby, congratulations on the magazine and newsletter. The magazine's very well done. Kudos to you guys. The reason I'm laughing is he goes in another question. I guess because he's vice chairman, he thinks he gets to, write a lot in the question box. Who knows more about Tunisia, you or Jim Falk? David Jacobs, we're going to find that out because I'm encouraging Abby to do an issue on Tunisia.
That's right. Right now, I'm going to give it to you, Jim. But give me some time to get an issue together. And then,
on a more serious note, how do you pick the countries? What goes into it?
Oh man, well, it's a little bit of art and a little bit of science, right? So we always want to make sure that in any year we're sort of hitting a diversity of places. We want to hit a few continents at any given year. We also like to sort of mix up country, region, city, and US. So we always like to sort of at the end of the year turn the camera inwards and pick a place in the United States that that we can look at because we are a US based publication. In our first year, we did that with the US National Parks, which was fascinating and certainly taught me a lot about the US National Parks and kind of the amazing resource that it is, and also some of the more troubling elements in sort of establishing some of the parks. The Texas guide, similarly, but we also do, like I said, we do a city. So I think for this year that was Lagos, Nigeria, and this coming year it's going to be Tehran, which is a city that almost, also sort of the city as we know it, and also the city in diaspora, right? Like what does it mean to be, to identify a place that you can't go to anymore, right? That's sort of part of your heritage and part of your identity, but not accessible. So sort of city loosely defined. We always do a country. This year that's Colombia. Last year that was South Korea. And like I said, we try to do a region as well. This year that's going to be Scandinavia. Last year that was the Mediterranean.
What fun you're having.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
So let's talk about Tehran. How do you go about, and it's a question from Kate that I'm slightly changing, how do you go about selecting contributors for each issue? So how do you do it with Tehran?
Yeah, so what we do is we start our editor, Kira, is a master at this. She starts with an advisory board. And so it's finding people who aren't necessarily themselves going to be the writers, but people who can offer these perspectives and ideas of both about the kinds of stories that need to be told, right? Stories that are not being told other places, just stories that are fun or exciting. We try to have some stuff that just sort of out of left field. Who would have thought of that, right? That are really fun, amidst some of the stories, as you mentioned, that can be kind of harder and heavier. And so we bring together those kinds of groups of individuals. And like I said, that can range from gallery owners, performers, academics and teachers, politicians sometimes, right? And sort of usually former politicians. And they come together and sort of help us think about the kinds of stories, and then also usually bring with them a network of writers. What's interesting is Tehran will be the second time that we're doing a place where there's a lot of dissident writers who are no longer located there. We did that with Moscow. So with our Moscow guide, a number of the people who submitted stories for that are no longer based in Moscow, or no longer based in Russia. And
do you pay the people who contribute?
Excuse me?
Or do you pay the people who contribute?
We pay everyone. And that is actually, you're asking about our model. That's a really important part to us. We feel like it's not a, journalism models that don't pay writers are not sustainable. And we also think that we only work with really expert storytellers, people who really, have devoted, years and years and years to knowing how to tell a story well and beautifully. And so we really try to reward that and make sure that we're paying everyone fairly.
Abby, highlight some of the names that are included in the issues.
Well, my favorite name and somebody I'm most kind of pleased to have is Wole Soyinka, who was one of the first, it was actually the first Black Nobel laureate ever, one for literature. And he had actually not written an original piece in about a decade, and agreed to write this extraordinarily beautiful sort of history of Lagos, sort of memories of Lagos, as sort of one of its most famous residents. And so we always try to bring in some really famous big names, and then also bring in up and comers who we're hopefully elevating and amplifying through their association. So with Ireland, we had Cola McCann, who's a best-selling author. South Korea has one of the best sort of newer writers, Chris Lee. Sort of moving on, our Texas guide, we were really excited. We had some folks, Maurice Shama, who has the piece on the death penalty and its history, but also S.C. Gwynn on just his a famous Texas writer, just on his thoughts about Austin and as a longtime Austinite, right? So we really run the gamut. We always also, we're a women-led publication, which is unusual in journalism to have both a female publisher and an editor-in-chief. And so I think one thing we also are cognizant of is making sure that we're creating a lot of space for marginalized, different kinds of marginalized groups. So we really try to give that thought in every guide, whether it's kind of gender balance or just minorities within a place whose voices aren't always elevated.
Where's it published?
Well, so our work is done between Oakland, California, and Austin, Texas, and then the actual magazine is printed currently in Lebanon Junction, Kentucky. Which is one of the last places. There aren't a ton of places anymore where you can really get the kind of quality publishing that we're after.
And I do want to stress, I mean, the quality of it is incredible. And when you look at the press coverage you've gotten and, awards already, even in only 2 years, everyone talks about just and you're really, you're just feeling you're picking up a work of art. And
well, that is absolutely the goal. So I'm really glad that that's how it comes forth.
So I guess we're all a bit more optimistic about the travel industry today than we were. Let's talk about it. And who knew? I mean, it's been a year. It's so hard to believe. It has been a year since we first started talking about COVID. And of course, none of us had any idea that we'd be in the situation that we're in now.
It was crazy. So we were an interesting. So we launched initially as a non-for-profit publication, and that was most of my background is in nonprofit publishing. We remain very mission driven, but we're no longer a nonprofit, and that was because we felt that while philanthropic emphasis was no longer on the humanities to the degree that it had been in the past, there was a lot of interest and excitement among partners in the travel industry who were asking us about the opportunities to work together. And so we decided that we would transition. We worked with our nonprofit board to transition from a nonprofit to a for-profit with the same mission and goals and outlook. It was really mostly about our business side. Well, we launched a supper club series the last week of February. We got, we had many partnerships that were we were kind of on the dotted lines, kind of end of February. And we found ourselves changing our business model in a hurry in March. And yeah, I mean, I will say from, sort of being that second tier, right? Like the travel industry has to kind of bounce back and then have more money for marketing before we're going to feel the impact as a travel publication. I think we're not optimistic that we're going to see impact ourselves until probably like, at best second part of this year. If not later. I mean, I think the vaccine rollout, hopefully we see that start to pick up steam, because I think that's hopefully our best path forward for.
As an aside, I gave a speech yesterday to the Rotary Club of Dallas and touched base with the fellow at the DFW International Airport who handles strategic initiatives. And he was mentioning that what you're beginning to see is a real rebound from Mexico and the Caribbean, because that's short haul, but that it is going to take a long time before people are comfortable and saying jumping on a plane and flying to Delhi or Cairo.
I think that's right. I think that's very true. And I mean, I think domestic travel will come back first. I think Mexico and sort of staying in the hemisphere and we'll come back second, and then and then you'll hopefully we start seeing those longer haul trips in the not too distant future. But I think it's definitely.
What are your thoughts, Kirsten, who I know loves to travel and in fact was in the Middle East right when COVID broke out and had a little bit of a challenge getting back home? What advice do you have for safe travel this year?
I mean, I'm not an expert, so I certainly don't want to, consult your doctor, right? Like is my main advice to everyone. But I also think, I mean, it is really interesting because there are countries, and particularly in Asia, where if you're willing to go for a long time, right? Like, and that's maybe more available to some folks than others, where you can quarantine and then really have a great time. I mean, my understanding is, places like Taiwan, it's very strict. You're going to be quarantined and go through quite a while in isolation, and then you are out and about, and it's a much more, once you get through that period, you're really able to, you know, jump into the streets and explore. I think Europe is harder. I think Europe is probably closer to the experience we're having in the US. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and I mean, I think that's the other piece, is that things are moving up and down. And so places
Israel is a real good example. I mean, 3 or 4 months ago, Israel looked great. Now
Yep.
they're doing another real severe lockdown.
They're having a real severe lockdown, but also they've managed to, I think they're leading the world in vaccine rollout. So you may see that, I mean, and so I think one of the bigger challenges is we're used to planning a trip 6 months out, right? We say, I'm gonna, here's my summer plans. That's what I would be, in normal times be sort of planning right now. And I think that's very hard with COVID. I think you're looking at much more, and that's, I think, to your point about places like Mexico and the Caribbean, where we're more able to plan a trip in weeks, not months.
I was supposed to lead a trip last June to Antarctica, a cruise, and I thought, well, after this, no way in hell am I going to get on a cruise liner. But last night on CNN, I saw the first advertisement that I've seen in months for one of the, I think it was Norwegian cruise lines, something like that. So I think they're
It's
making.
interesting. Well, and they're trying to do these creative things. I don't know if you've seen these cruises to nowhere, where they're
Yeah,
doing
they did
cruises where
that.
you get on the boat, you kind of see things, but you don't get out.
Yeah, and they said it'd be safe, and a bunch of people got COVID on that. So not such a good idea.
Yeah.
What are some, and Rachel asked this, what are some of the places that we might not think of, sort of like the New York Times, 52 places to visit?
Right.
Where do you want to go that you've not been to?
Oh man, well, I really wanted to go to South Korea. I was bummed that I did not get to go to South Korea. But I mean, I think we really are of the mind that almost anywhere is a place you can go if you take precautions, you do the research, you do the work, right? Like to sort of know what you're getting into. I mean, there are exceptions that don't go to a place where there's an active armed conflict in general, but there are a lot of places, I think, that are worth exploring, and I think Americans in particular have gotten much more global in their view of travel more recently. And I know that's probably due to work like the work of the World Affairs Council, right? So a great example, Colombia, where we're doing our guide, was not a place that I think most Americans would have thought to travel 10 years ago, and now is really throwing its doors open. I mean, COVID aside, as a great travel destination and a place where you can really have just an extraordinary experience, both in the cities in Bogota and elsewhere, and also, I mean, in these extraordinary natural preserves that they have there, and that in some ways are sort of more preserved as a result of having had the conflict, right? That companies didn't go in as much, and so you have a lot more natural beauty that can be explored now. And we actually have a piece on that in that guide, so that's
Well
that's
done. Well, I think there's going to be
but
more people wanting to do adventure travel too. I got the brochure 2 nights ago from Backroads. Smaller group, get tested before, go ride your bike or hike, and I think people are going to feel safer with that. Hey, Abby, you're going to love this. This is from one of my favorite members, Tarak Rajev. I sent the guide about Texas to my nephew, Cyril, in Saint-Mond, outside of Paris, before Christmas. He's happy to have a chance to learn about the state where his uncle America, has lived for over 40 years. So there you go. You got.
Oh, I love hearing that. I do. That makes me so happy, because I think, yeah, for those of us in Texas, it's really fun to have a little way to say, like, this is a taste of us. This is a window into this, very complex place that's so often sort of caricatured, right?
I hate to go political, but I can't resist with what's happening in the
Brace
last week
yourself.
in our
Yeah.
country. How do you think, and both of us have traveled a lot, how do you think what has happened is being perceived, say, in some of the countries that you've written about? And what are you hearing? Because clearly your network must be extensive.
I mean, we started hearing from our writers, right? And writers from places that you wouldn't necessarily expect, with tremendous concern, from Nigeria, from Moscow, right? Like places that have struggled with their own sort of issues, right? And I mean, every country struggled with its own issues, but I think it really was shocking to a lot of people, and we were talking about this, Jim, that even if you're expecting sort of that, rhetoric has consequences, and that rhetoric can lead to violence, I think seeing those images in the Capitol were shocking to people. And it was interesting that shortly after the incidents on last week, I got an email from a friend in the UK. He said, well, we get more American coverage of the US than we do of the rest of Europe combined, right? That the US news really is broadcast worldwide. People all over the world know our political leaders, to a great degree, not just our president, but senators, congress people. And so I think the shockwaves are greater than I think some of us, I mean, so many of us are sort of focused right now on what's happening here. And I think it's going to be a little while before we as a country are sort of looking up to the degree that we probably want to, and sort of looking around at other places. But I think it was really scary for a lot of people in countries who, understand that the US hasn't, has rarely, if ever, lived up to its promise and its potential. But that promise and its potential still have so much symbolic meaning around the world.
There was a really interesting article I read, I think in the Washington Post last week, written by the writer said, this is how we would cover this if it were happening in another country. There was an attempted coup in the Capitol and thousands of people went, and I think that's the way it's being seen.
All of our guides are evergreen. They're not it's not like a typical magazine where they go out of date. And so, look through our full set of guides, and you might see a place, year one was Mexico City and Moscow in the Caribbean. If those are places of interest, you can still buy those guides as well.
And
we almost have straddle book and magazine in that.
And wasn't it fun to see the Texas Monthly put it, I guess, in the November issue as one of the top gifts to give?
That was definitely made my day, made my week that week. Yeah, it was great. And I think, given that, I mean, one thing we did in the wake of, we were talking about sort of the travel industry, right? And we had to really, as a small independent publication, had to pivot in big ways. But I think in some ways it was really clarifying for us, because our mission at the end of the day is, it's a little bit about travel, but it's really just about awareness and trying to think about encountering these, other voices, other perspectives. And in a funny way, COVID highlighted for me how critical that work is, right? That in a time when borders are closed, we have to keep learning about other people and other perspectives. It's critical to sort of this, kind of moving in a positive direction. And it was really wonderful to see, as our year went on, we really did see an uptick in people wanting to give it as gifts to young people, which made me really happy, to sort of say there's a world out there, even if you can't get to it right this minute. Here's one way to sort of stay engaged.
Can you buy it in a bookstore?
You can. So we're in quite a few bookstores. We're in Barnes and Noble. We're in Whole Foods. We're also in a number of independent bookstores. And if we're not in one that you like, ask for us, and they can get us there.
It's a mile down the road, and terrorbangbooks.com is our strategic partner. So
I'll
go check, see if it's there. Is there anything else you'd like to tell our viewers?
Oh man, I mean, I'm so grateful that there are groups like World Affairs Councils out there, because I think we really exist to engage in conversation, right? We see every guide that we produce as the pieces being in conversation, and some degree in conversation with the reader. And I know that work in a different form is happening in places like this. the other thing I was just going to add about the way that we define our work, which I think is a little unusual, is that we really see travel. I think in the US, we talk about travel, we really mean kind of tourism, right? Like sort of travel that's for our own edification. At Strangers Guide, we define travel a little more broadly to mean when people are moving across place. And so one of the groups and topics that we really try to engage with on a regular basis are the experiences of displaced people and refugees, people whose, movement and travel isn't maybe of a kind that they would have chosen, but nonetheless they're dealing with. And so I think that's something that, I think this is a moment, we're talking about the events in the Capitol and what's, the events to come in Washington. And I think this is such a critical moment for reflection, as well as, hopefully action, right? Not just reflection. But I think that we're really, the role of storytellers is to aid that and to offer perspectives and ways to engage and reflect in directions that maybe you wouldn't on your own have access to. And so I hope that we're a tool in that way, especially in this moment, when I think, the role of storytellers is important, right? Like how we tell the stories, how we remember something, is really critical.
Well, one of our active travelers, he's traveled to a few countries with me, is Ray in Dion Termini, and he asks, do you also offer a newsletter that is available more often than the quarterly guide?
We do. So we have two newsletters. We have one, we do a Sunday reading every week, which is just an excerpt. Typically that has some relation, it's sometimes it's just sort of some story that we love, and sometimes it's speaks to the current moment. And so we do that on every Sunday, just as a way to give you a little respite and a little bite-sized reading. But on Tuesdays, we send out our field guides, and I love our field guide emails because they're I think I was saying this before, they're the inverse of our publication, whereas our publication deep dives into one location and gives you arts and culture, politics, sports, all around one place. Our field guides are designed to look at a theme across location. Sometimes that includes writing from new people. What it always includes is readings and excerpts from people around the world, writers around the world. And so we do a different theme each week. We have one coming up on chocolate that's going to include a Q&A with two sisters who are Ghanaian chocolate makers. But it's going to look at chocolate around the world, from the fun and the great stuff, who doesn't love chocolate, to some of the more troubling stuff that, the supply chain and labor around chocolate is really troubling. It's one of the industries that has yet to really grapple fully with child labor, right?
So those newsletters, Abby, is that included in our basic subscription? Or
if you're not getting the newsletter, you can go to our website, strangersguide.com, and click newsletter and just put your email in, and you'll start getting the newsletters. I think our subscribers, you should be getting it, but if you're not, that's the fastest.
I got your email address and cell phone. I know how to get it.
You can get me, or just email me and I'll take care of it. That's all.
Before we say a bientôt, I was thinking, we're always looking at for programs at the World Affairs Council, and it could really be fun to, when you come out with each issue, for us to do a program where we focus on it. Now, I'm saying that, and as you know, I'm leaving the council in a few weeks, but so I'm leaving this for my successor. But it could be a really nice way to have a.
We would love that. We would, and I will say that our editor, the stories, we've sort of been working actually on our staff to sort of figure out how to collect and better tell the stories that we have from just putting these issues together, because it's fascinating, right? We have worked now on 5 continents. We've worked with all sorts of, different writers, photographers with very different topics and matter. And sometimes the stories of getting the story can be as fun, and how those stories kind of come to be, right? Can be really interesting. In our National Parks Guide, we worked with a photographer who had taken pictures in the 70s of tourists at national parks. And we decided it was just such an extraordinary set of photos that we included it in the guide. And so Roger Minnick, who took the photos, extraordinary guy, quite elderly now, but had taken those photos years ago, before, camera phones, before, and the photo essay is called "Before the Selfie," to sort of emphasize that. So we would love that. We would love to sort of share, what goes into each guide, because it's really fun.
I think it'd be great. Abby, I'm so grateful to the Consul General of Ireland who introduced us several months ago. I think it's the beginning of a great relationship between the World Affairs Council and Stranger's Guide. And I've enjoyed getting to know you, and want to encourage everybody to continue to read the Stranger's Guide, give it as gifts. And Valentine's is coming up. Give it to your Valentine. And let me also remind you that we have, to keep abreast of our programs, please go to dfwworld.org. Abby, if you're not yet a member of the World Affairs Council, we'll take care of that as well. And there's a program that I want to be sure you know about. That's going to be Wednesday, February 10th at 6 p.m., another Global Forum program. You never forget your first. I'll just leave it at that. No, a biography of George Washington by Alexis Coe, and our good friend Jeff Engel from SMU will be leading that armchair conversation. I hope you'll consider to continue to support our World Affairs Council. You can always do that by texting the word DFW World to 44321. Have a great rest of your evening, and thanks again for joining us. Stay safe, everyone.